I'm going to talk about audio outsourcing, contracts, budgets, and workflow. So kind of, for the audio developer out there, the audio contractor, as well as, a developer interested in learning more about this process, there's kind of three main things I'm going to touch on, three focus areas. And the first is contracts. And we've only got like 20 minutes, right? So it's going to be a fairly cursory overview of these topics, but I want to make sure I highlight like the three primary types of contracts people are using: Workforhire, exclusive, and non-exclusive. And then beyond that, kind of touching budgets, looking a little bit at cost breakdowns, how audio people, composers, sound designers are billing for their services and what that kind of breaks out to and looks like. And then also workflow. So, a lot of audio contractors are remote and not in-house. And so I've kind of distilled three techniques that we use at our studio to make this process a little bit simpler. So just curious, how many people here are audio people? Is it like everybody an audio person? Developers, non-audio people? Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Good. Well, so about me, and then we'll do a little Q&A. Again, my name is Richard. I have a company in LA. There's 7 of us. We produce music, sound, voiceover for a lot of different games, kind of do a lot of technical integration as well. So we work on, everything from indie to mobile, AAA, whatever. But let's dive right in. So the purpose of a contract, regardless of the agreement type that we're dealing with, there's a few key things that we all want to key in on when we're trying to establish that. And that's who owns the copyright first, right? Like that's a big one. Who's going to own what work is being created? And then and then exactly what are you being contracted to provide? How much music, want to make sure this is all very specified. When are you delivering it? What are the delivery milestones? And if you don't know them right up front, putting something in like says, we'll agree on this via email or something at a later date. How much you're getting paid, usually at each delivery milestone, specifying all this, being very clear. And then really kind of distilling what are the developers' usage rights and what are the content creators' usage rights. So if you're the developer, and it's a license deal, do they have the right to do the soundtrack? How does that break out? Who is going to manage that? And who's going to get the royalties from that? And then if you're the content creator, just because we make the work ourselves doesn't mean we have the God-given right to put that on our website and display it and say we did this. You need to spell these things out. So really being very clear. Same thing with even saying you worked on the game. This needs to be spelled out. So making sure all of the usage rights and, things are very understood upfront very clearly. So the first type of agreement is a work for hire, right? And this is your buyout, your most common type of agreement that we're seeing in game development. And with this, the developer obtains most of the rights associated with the work or what's being created, right? Because they're purchasing it. And because of this, they can usually use the audio pretty much however they want. Again, you can modify this based on what you put in the contract, but for the most part, I make it, they buy it, it's theirs. And the developer also has the exclusive right to use the audio, right? Because they purchased it, I can't turn around and sell it to somebody else. And this is hassle-free for developers. It prevents a lot of issues, and that's kind of why it's used so frequently. But on the audio side, it means we can charge a bit more because basically all of our rights are being purchased. Sometimes you can still hang on to your PROs, of course, the back-end performing rights, royalties. But again, in games, those are almost useless for us as far as being played from a game. They can, have advantages later on for concerts or the pennies you'll make off YouTube, but as far as a game garnering you PROs, it's almost non-existent. So kind of the antithesis of the work-for-hire buyout is the non-exclusive license, right? And so this is where the audio contractor is going to hang on to most of the rights. And, the first thing I always tell developers is don't be afraid of these, right? Because they sound scary in terms of, there's some licensing issue that might come up and it tanks my game's ability to sell or whatnot. But, it's really a way that you can obtain the same exact custom audio that would have been made under a work-for-hire buyout contract for a cheaper rate with some different limitations. And so it's about both that for custom audio, but also, if you go purchase from a library, the same type of deal, a non-exclusive license. And again, you can still have unrestricted use of the audio in your project. So I feel like there's a lot of miseducation with developers regarding licenses. And so, letting them know you can still use this however you want as long as it's related to the project. But then, audio people have the ability to go ahead and resell that potentially to a future client. Making that clear kind of clears up some of the confusion, I think, with this. So developers can save a lot of money with this, much cheaper rates. And again, we can then turn around and license it elsewhere. So a lot of developers, they approach us. They can't necessarily afford our work-for-hire rates, and they don't want the non-exclusive license because they want their game to be the only one to have that music or sound. So in this situation, I usually propose an exclusive license. And a lot of times, once I explain what this is, developers are very happy to do this. And there's a few different ways to approach it. Because the audio contractor still retains complete ownership of the audio, but the developer basically gets the exclusive right to use it in their game. And that type of exclusivity is defined in a few different ways. Sometimes it's industry specific, so I won't, sell this music to any other game developers, but I might put it in a TV show or commercial. And that happens sometimes, but most of the exclusivity is usually time-based, like 1 to 5 years. And we offer like a few different ways of looking at this with our clients. We'll say, okay, you want to be able to have this exclusively, but if your game does well, you want to keep it exclusive. So what we'll even tell them is, okay, you don't want to buy the work-for-hire price right away? No problem. We'll do an exclusive license for 1 or 2 years. And at the end of 1 or 2 years, we'll specify a price in the contract that you have the option to buy it out for and acquire the full rights. So we'll give them that option. And that way, if their game does well, we'll specify maybe it was, here's one price and it'll be 1.5 times that if you buy it out later, but they still have the option. And then if their game does well, they can pick it up. Or if not, it just lapses into a perpetual non-exclusive license. And so a lot of developers are very keen to kind of jump on that and, see how their game's going to do. And if they need those rights later, they have the option. I think this is a really healthy balance of pricing control. Licenses really have found that they scare developers, and presenting it like this really gives them another option to take away. So I've also got some sample agreements if you want to download them. Go to the website, hexneyaudio.com/agreements. Password is GameAudio, all lowercase. There's a non-exclusive license up there. There's a work-for-hire contract. They're kind of the basis for a lot of the work we do, and are kind of fair, very fair to both sides. And so they're a good starting point for discussions on this. So budgets. I meet somebody out in the world. I'm like, hi, I'm Richard. They're like, hi, I'm John. And their first question is, oh, you do audio? How much do you charge? And it's such a difficult question to answer because audio is such an elastic experience, right? You could put 1 minute of looping music into a 4-hour game, or you could put 6 hours of music into a 4-hour game. So it just really depends on how deep you want to go in an experience. And so quoting someone for their project without knowing more is really almost impossible. And so, a question I always ask is, well, what's your budget? Not because you want to milk everything that somebody has for their audio, but because you want to say, great, for that amount, I can give you this. And it's a much easier starting point, and sometimes difficult to get, but I feel like it's sometimes a little different than art or whatnot, which is more straightforward. I have 7 characters. I need 7 models. Do we need 7 musical themes? Not necessarily. So it really just depends on, available budget and how deep you want to go. And then if you want to hire live players, there's so many factors. And some of those are also, deadline. Is it due tomorrow? Is it due in 2 years? The musical style might inform these choices, right? If you've got like solo piano versus something that requires ethnic live players, all affects the cost. Release platform, especially in mobile and VR, doing platform-specific optimizations, be this with VR spatialization software or like compression and memory and streaming settings, all of these affect. So if you're deploying on multiple platforms and you're handling integration or implementation, big factor here. And then like we just talked about, work for hire or license deals really can affect the cost, and people don't think about this upfront. And again, how much are you buying? If you're buying 30 minutes of music, maybe you get a better per minute music rate than if you're buying 1 minute. Audio costs are all over the map. When I started one of my very first projects, my partner and I were going to both work on the project, and he was sitting in the back of a room, and we were talking with the developers, and they go through the whole, this is our, project, and then they say, how much is it going to cost? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to say. And so my partner's sitting in the back on the couch, and he kind of goes like this with his fingers. And I'm like, okay, 2,000, that's like a little higher than I was initially thinking, but that works. And so I'm like, yeah, like 2K. And then I see his like jaw drop. He had meant $200 later. So we had no idea what we were doing. But anyway, yeah. So how does this break down in terms of how composers and sound designers are charging. I like to say 5 to 15% is maybe like an audio budget of a game, but in reality, like the more games I work on, the more inaccurate I see that is, and it's smaller. It seems like maybe the larger the game, the smaller that percentage, because there is more money available and goes to marketing or whatnot, but I still like to say it as like this mythical figure, and I feel like it does apply in a lot of cases. So we'll go with that. 5 to 15% of a game's budget might be audio. And it's usually broken down like this, per minute music fee. Most composers aren't charging an hourly unless they're doing maybe potentially implementation or something else. So a per minute music fee is kind of the standard in music. For sound, it's a little more nebulous. Very often it's a per asset fee. So for each sound effect, but we bill variations like Gunshot 02, 03 as one asset, so there's a lot of flexibility here. And a lot of people do flat rate for a project. They'll kind of take a look and say, this is what we're going to, charge. We've done that. Also kind of looking at maybe like a monthly rate. We'll get put on contract for like 18 months and get a monthly fee. Hourly is a big thing as well, but I personally don't like it because you kind of go in and don't really know what, as a developer, exactly you're going to be paying necessarily. So, but a lot of people do that for implementation as well. They'll kind of separate asset design from implementation as opposed to bundling it. We bundle it, but everybody is different. Back-end profit sharing, it's kind of a, in indies, absolutely a viable alternative, revenue stream. If you take a smaller percentage of your fee up front, compensate that with some type of back-end. Hasn't worked out amazingly well in my experience doing it, but it definitely is some, and it's kind of, hit or miss, and it gets you invested in a project as an audio contractor, so definitely a way for developers to get people invested. And then, usually it's a combination of all these things above. I will say it's dangerous to assign an intrinsic value to an asset, right? Like that gunshot that you paid $65, $75 for is not necessarily worth $65 or $75. It's the time of talking about creating the gunshot, logging into spreadsheets, maybe implementing it, having the meetings, trying to get the Perforce server that the client's giving you access to working. It's all of these things, and when you're not billing hourly, this is how you're billing, and a client sometimes starts assigning intrinsic value to pieces of content. Like, I'm paying $65 for a footstep. That's insane. But no, you're not. You're paying for the overall, all of the time involved in doing everything, revisions and whatnot. So I really hesitate to break down and tell a developer, yes, it's this much per asset. I present it as a package, because that's really what it is. And yeah, can get dangerous. So cost breakdowns, how do all these things break down with music and sound? Usually we separate them and we try to modularize our bid, This way we can say, because an audio experience is so elastic, here's what we would recommend, here's what we would normally charge, and then it lets the developer kind of thin that down if they look at it and say, this is too much, or we want more of this, So music, we might break down cost into themes and arrangements. If you have a jungle level and a desert level, maybe the first initial theme is one cost, and kind of arrangements of that are less, or transitional things, stingers, all priced separately. Sound, primary sounds versus variations, 02, 03, 04, implementation into maybe middleware, integration into a game engine. These are all kind of the different components that you think about in pricing. And then with voiceover or dialogue, there's a casting fee or agency fee sometimes, 10%, 20%, 10% usually. Actors, the director recording them, the recording studio maybe, usually bundled with the recording engineer's fee, and then editing and processing. So we usually try and present these as just like one cost per thing, like a per minute thing, a per asset thing, a per, word or hour of recording for dialogue. But these are all the components, and we sometimes break them down to really show clients exactly what they're paying for, and it lets them slim down the budget to what they think they need. So let's look at a totally outlandishly random $500,000, maybe it was like a kickstarted indie project, and kind of using that maybe 5 to 15%. Maybe this theoretical game needs 18 minutes of music and 300 sounds, and say we were going to charge, so these numbers are not arbitrary, they're, definitely reasonable costs, but they're not related to this specific project, obviously. So maybe it needs 8 minutes of themes, $8,000, 10 minutes of arrangements at $700 a minute, $7,000, maybe 300 sounds, maybe that's like 18 grand, and the total is 33 grand. And that's like way too much for a developer, right? Like this is a very common situation. Say their budget is 20 grand and we got to reduce that and still keep the audio experience alive, right? So maybe this becomes reducing the amount of themes, increasing the amount of arrangements, reducing sound effects variations if they've got like 60, variations for that, or adding 3% on top of that as well of profit sharing, and then switching to a license agreement. And so this is a very common situation. We get a bid, we make the bid, they reject the bid, and then we work to slim it down and keep the audio experience, robust. And so it's usually a combination of all of these things on most projects. Yeah. Again, those numbers may look ludicrous to someone else, but that's where we are. So workflow. As a remote contractor, there's some broken workflows and better workflows, and being in-house is always fantastic, but there's drawbacks, like maybe you don't have the right equipment or studios or your own room if you're in-house, but I really like working separately and being connected, with the client via like source control and whatnot. But a broken workflow here is sending audio files via like Dropbox. This is terrible. And of course we do it, and of course it's fine for some project, but it's kind of broken, and I'd like to see more and more people move away from it. Not only do you have no control over how audio is being implemented as the audio person, but the developer has to spend a lot of time setting up, often custom scripts and systems for playback, and then maybe they aren't that versed in, audio scripting, and it kind of turns out very messy, and the playback is not great. Again, you've got no control over mixing either. Like, forget implementation, you can't even mix the game this way. We would get requests like, sound too loud, or too quiet, and it's like, turn it up, it's already like normalized, but we'll have to go and like adjust an audio file if it's an not ignorant, but unknowing developer who doesn't know about setting these things up. And so this is a way that wastes a lot of people's time and creates a product that I think is inferior. And it works for some projects, it absolutely does, especially if there's an in-house audio team and they're contracting specific asset design. But if you're handling all of the asset design for a project, this method is terrible. So the better method is source control, right? You're hooked up with Perforce or SVN or Git, and ideally you're using some type of audio middleware, but that's another discussion. We have a panel on it later. And in this way, audio person is implementing, or at the very least, seeing how content is implemented. So even if you don't have implementation control, you can still get Perforce access with no commit privileges. See how things are being implemented, sync down the project, see the way things are working, and then potentially if you're using middleware or even not, just submit mix changes. But even not being able to submit anything, we can sometimes, argue our way into no commit privileges, and then after a while, maybe you get them, maybe you don't, but it integrates you much better. Control of mixing, big thing. And, this offloads so much work from the developer, and that's usually my argument is, right, programmer hours are very, very valuable to a developer, and making the argument that you're going to save them valuable program hours by offloading work to you that we don't charge extra for is a big thing. And that's the thing too, is we tell our clients, like, look, we bundle implementation into all of our costs for our per asset fee. And so we tell the developers we can do this or we cannot. If you don't want us to do it, that's fine, but you still have to pay for it. And it really encourages them to let us do it because we're billing them for work that we're not doing then. And that's it's worked out well for us. So next is tracking, right? Like really robust asset tracking, especially if you're the contractor who's not doing in-engine integration. We use Google Sheets and use this very robust thing, and now we actually have a system that we built that sucks the data right from Wise and can actually shoot it from a Google Sheet back into Wise to make changes. But you don't even need that. Like a manual plugging in this information is fine. But some key things here are, right, it's got like event names or audio hook names, for how things are being called in game. Game status, is it implemented? And then like revision needed is a great one that we mark all the time. Write a little revision notes on what needs to be changed. And then some integration notes like this is in this level, it's attached to this source, it should be triggered when this happens. And then maybe there's a integration note needed if we're not doing it. We say, hey, use an AK ambient component for this, etc. We log assets, kind of it's a one-shotter loop, who created it on our team, and then like an asset status column as well, and a Wise status. So we've got like asset status. Has it been created? Has it been approved? And we have various levels of approval, like approved pending playtest, approved after that, pending client approval, approved final, so that we've got multiple layers we kind of walk through. And then once it's implemented as well into Wise, and then the game status, and it all becomes this game of turning the whole sheet green. Ours kind of turns this bright, ugly green, which makes you feel happy and good. And then the last thing I want to mention is temping a game. And not temping it in the sense of adding in temp music or sound effects as references, but temping a game with what we use are like click files or temporary just white noise for ambiances and things. And this lets us like hook up audio early on. So we have a collection of files, and there's a number of them. One of them's like a click, 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 click for loops. One of them's a click for a one shot. And for that one, we have 3 different types, different lengths, right? Like a really quick click, and that's the file. And then the next one is like click, and then it waits 5 seconds, and then click, and it waits 20 seconds. And we do this in order to artificially bloat the memory budget early on. So a lot of times, developer is not going to accurately, allocate resources properly. So if we can hook up temp audio early on, it's just silence after this click, but it gives a better idea of this sound is going to be this long, and it starts filling that up so they can get a better idea for performance, because we've been screwed many times when it comes down to the end and everybody realizes how much space audio is actually taking up. Another great thing is because there's a nice little click right at the start, when you do your gameplay capture to make the sound and sync it to that, you can capture and see exactly how it's implemented. Right where the click, it'll show up in your DAW, and you can say, great, that's the trigger point. I can start, the first frame of design there. Also, we don't use a beep just in case, God forbid the game ships and there's a click in it. Has happened. Clicks are nice little kind of benign things. But and it also lets you learn about potential implementation issues, like that ambience isn't cutting off when I went into the cave or whatnot. So it's a good way to kind of deal with issues early on and get the game going. I have my email address up here at the end. I don't have a link, but if you want to email me, happy to send you our click files that we use. So just to summarize again, usage rights, determining them in agreements, Workforhire, considering license agreements, non-exclusive and exclusive licenses, compensation, maybe 5 to 15% of the budget, modularizing your price, and then potentially licensing or backend to reduce costs. Workflow, source control access. Big good one there. Detailed asset tracking, and finally, temping a game. Q&A, and I'll put up my email address. Feel free to email me any questions or click files. But any questions I can answer. Initially, we were in school, and it was really like, hey, I've got 2 demo tracks. And I went to my friend and was like, you've got 2 demo tracks too. We could put these on a website and have 4 demo tracks on a website. And so it kind of started as more of a creative collective of a couple of us, working together in school. And then at some point it was like, oh, this could maybe feed us, right? And so after graduating, the ones of us that wanted to continue with that, went and got our move to LA and kind of went from there. And we hired our first employee and just kind of grew gradually from there. And there's 7 of us now. And so we're all, in-house and whatnot, but we don't really do the remote thing like we initially started. And we just got very lucky. A lot of right place, right time, I think. Now that the composers are handling more implementation, with the prevalence of broader middleware, that changes the game. People are charging hourly, or like Mike said, maybe 1.5 times to do that as well, or whatnot. So I think maybe from a content perspective, it's still relevant there, but it's a sliding scale, and it definitely slides. But it's been around for a while. It is a thought I've had many times. Thanks so much, appreciate it, and go audio.